All aspects of the Eightfold Path have either influenced the martial arts or are an intrinsic element of the classic warrior codes. But exactly how is this connection made? Well, surely of central importance is the martial art form called Kung Fu, without which there could be no chapter on the warrior monks of the Shaolin Temple. Now, in popular imagination, Kung Fu basically involves two people kicking the crap out of each other, and it is indeed a martial art, but it originated as and continues to be primarily a spiritual practice, an aid to the elements of the Eightfold Path concerned with contemplation, right effort, right mind, and right concentration. Kung Fu tracks back to Bodhidharma, a Buddhist monk who was a proponent of what is called Zen Buddhism. The force of meaning in Zen is meditation. Bodhidharma believed that the truth of Buddhism could be found not in the study of sacred texts, but rather from inside oneself, and that the key to self-exploration was meditation. His Zen teachings are sometimes called the philosophy of no mind. I find Zen difficult to understand, but I think it is fair to say that it regards conscious thought as an impediment to spiritual awareness rather than a means by which to achieve it. The legend goes that Bodhidharma first visited the Shaolin Temple. But when he did, he considered the Shaolin monks too caught up in the teachings of Buddhism to actually try to be like the Buddha. In essence, he thought that they failed to practice contemplation sufficiently. And when they did, they lacked the fortitude to practice meditation for any length of time. He left the temple and for several years lived in a nearby cave, cultivating superior skill at meditation. Now, Shaolin monks recognized that skill and asked that he tutor them, but each time he refused, saying that he would take no disciples until, quote, heaven makes the snow red, end quote. Finally, a Shaolin monk came to the entrance of Bodhidharma's cave with a sword in his right hand and resolutely cut off his left arm, making the snow red with his own blood. Bodhidharma then agreed to teach the Shaolin monks his meditative techniques. Much of what Bodhidharma taught the Shaolin monks focused on the manipulation of their internal energy, called qi, which might be thought of as their essential life force. Now, at this moment, at this point, let me remind you of the depictions of the Buddha that to the uninitiated make him seem fat. In Zen Buddhism, the epicenter of one's qi, one's life force, is considered to be located in the abdomen. And the Buddha's large abdomen is meant to symbolize the abundance of qi that he possessed. The purpose of learning to manipulate one's qi was to help strengthen, heal, and defend the body so that the body's natural vulnerabilities would not impede the pursuit of enlightenment. Bodhidharma taught a series of demanding exercises called the 18 routines of Shaolin Wushu, each designed to help the monks focus and control their qi. In modern times, some of these routines have become a part of a competitive international sport. This brief video showing a woman, Jade Zhu, performing a wushu exercise centered on manipulating a gunshu, a staff, will give you an idea of what these routines could be like. But the point isn't really how well she manipulates the gunshu per se. The gunshu is really a tool to facilitate the manipulation of her qi, her essential life force. I think it would be fair to call it a dynamic form of meditation.
Ended round number one.
Eventually, these wushu exercises combined with ancient Chinese and Indian grappling and boxing techniques to produce kung fu. Kung fu had two purposes. Primarily, it was a spiritual practice, a method of learning to control and to manipulate one's qi. But it was also a means of self-defense. Shaolin monks traveled without weapons, but when they encountered danger from bandits, for example, they used kung fu to fend off their attackers. In effect, they honed their own bodies into weapons. Karate was developed for the same purpose of practical self-defense. It originated in Okinawa in the mid-15th century when the ruler of Okinawa adopted a policy of banning weapons. Lacking conventional weapons, Okinawans invented a system of strikes and kicks that at close range were as effective as conventional weapons. I want to turn now to Bruce Lee, probably the most famous martial artist of the 20th century, and certainly the one most concerned with advancing the martial arts as a spiritual practice, and to use his story to drive home the meaning of the warrior code of the Shaolin Temple monks. Although born in the United States in 1940, Lee spent most of his youth in Hong Kong, where he developed a passion for a Kung Fu style called Wing Chun. He's shown here with Ip Man, a legendary Wing Chun master who was the only martial art instructor under whom Lee studied. In 1959, Lee came to the United States and moved to Seattle, where he opened a martial arts academy almost immediately, and also began attending classes at the University of Washington, where he majored in drama. Lee's father was involved in filmmaking, and as a child, Lee had appeared in several films. As a result, as Lee entered his 20s, his life followed two parallel tracks: as a martial arts instructor, but also as an actor. In 1966, Lee won a key supporting role in a short-lived TV show called The Green Hornet, which I loved as a kid. Apparently, I was one of the few TV viewers who did, because the show was canceled after only a few months. The show's premise was that the Green Hornet was supposedly a criminal, but he was actually a good guy pretending to be a criminal in order to infiltrate other criminal organizations and defeat their plans. Bruce Lee played Kato, his chauffeur, who drove this wicked, cool, gadget-laden limousine called Black Beauty. Kato also functioned as the Green Hornet bodyguard and obviously used Kung Fu to do it. Lee could execute movements so fast that the show's director asked him to slow down, which Lee refused to do, by the way. Although the series lasted only a few months, it showcased Lee as a charismatic actor whose feats of martial arts were nothing like most Americans had ever seen. It was clear that big things lay ahead of him in both film and television. Big things were already happening in his martial arts career. Lee became impatient with the formality of various martial arts styles and created a fluid style of his own that he called Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. His style integrated Kung Fu and other martial arts forms and emphasized flexibility over rigidly stylized classic forms. This image, by the way, is the cover of a book Lee wrote on the subject, published after his death. Now, he later regretted calling his style a way, because the whole point of his way was to reject the limitations inherent in a way. Few Americans had ever heard of Kung Fu before Bruce Lee brought it to light via the Green Hornet and his highly successful martial arts career. But knowledge of Kung Fu exploded into American culture with the 1972 arrival of a show called Kung Fu, in which the main character, Kwai Chang Caine, who was the son of an American father and a Chinese mother, wanders the Old West in search of his half brother. The very first episode makes it clear that Kwai Chang Caine was orphaned as a child and accepted for training at the Shaolin Temple. Kung Fu was thus a Western whose central character happened to be a Shaolin monk and Kung Fu master. It's a fascinating premise. Every episode involved Caine attempting to be at peace with all men, but sooner or later having to beat the crap out of one or more men who desperately needed it. But the show was not at all a shallow exploitation of the rising Kung Fu craze. Each episode also involved flashbacks to Caine's training at the Shaolin Temple, and his every action was convincingly informed by the precepts of Zen Buddhism. The show ran for 3 seasons. I loved it. So did a lot of other people. And for purposes of preparing this presentation, I reviewed video clips from a number of episodes, and it holds up very well. For our purpose, the show Kung Fu matters partly because it showcased the warrior monks of the Shaolin Temple, but primarily because there is considerable reason to believe that Bruce Lee created the concept for the series, and absolute certainty that he was considered for the starring role until the producers decided that an American audience would not accept an Asian man as the star of a TV show. Instead, they made Caine half Chinese and half American in order to have a white actor, David Carradine, portray Kwai Chang Caine. Well, regardless of whether Lee did create the artistic concept of Kung Fu, some say he did, others say he didn't, Lee definitely saw the public's growing fascination with Kung Fu as a way to teach the spiritual philosophy that underpinned it. He appeared in 2 martial arts films that were major hits. And by the time he starred in his 3rd major film, Enter the Dragon, released in 1973, Lee had the clout to smuggle a fair dose of Zen Buddhist thought, spirituality, into the script. In effect, come for the butt-kicking, stay for the spiritual enlightenment. The plot of Enter the Dragon pitted Bruce Lee against the Shaolin Kung Fu master who had gone over to the dark side. And here again, we see the classic Jungian archetypes of the warrior in his fullness and the mentor against the shadow warrior and the shadow mentor. Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Vader in Star Wars, Sergeant Alliance against Sergeant Barnes in Platoon, Hector versus Achilles in the Iliad. You see these patterns repeatedly because this stuff communicates, this stuff gets through to people. And I want to show you on the other side 3 clips from Enter the Dragon, because I think they drive home the essence of the warrior code of the Shaolin Temple. The first clip you're going to see is the opening scene of the movie. It is set at the Shaolin Temple and involves a match between Bruce Lee and an advanced student of Kung Fu. The match assures the audience at the outset that they're going to get the martial arts fighting they paid their money for. But almost immediately, you'll see an elderly man in red robes. He's the Shaolin Temple master and Bruce Lee's mentor. And after Bruce Lee executes a spectacular backward vault, the film moves immediately into the first of several scenes in which Kung Fu as a spiritual practice is explored. Pay close attention and bear in mind everything you've learned about Buddhism, the teachings of Bodhidharma, and the Wushu exercises. So you're going to see this first scene that I told you about, and then the next scene you will see is one in which the Bruce Lee character leaves to teach a lesson to a young student. Pay attention to that as well. And then finally, the third scene will be one that takes place on a junk ship carrying a number of martial artists to Hans Island, to which he has invited the world's best martial artists to compete in a tournament he has organized. And this scene takes place in the junk, speaks for itself. But I'll tell you parenthetically, when you watch it, think back on the ideas of Sun Tzu in The Art of War and look for the connections there.